November 22nd of 1968, the world was blessed with what in my opinion is the best piece of media ever released, the White Album. This album marked a massive change for the Beatles, not only in terms of sound, but in the way they marketed their albums. Instead of going for another colorful and elegantly designed single-disc album, they decided to create a melting pot of genres that is 93 minutes in length. And I know, a double album with some of the most groundbreaking and unique music of the time, it sounds amazing. And yes, it does, but unfortunately there's a lot of people who seem to disagree.
Well, I think in a way it was a mistake doing 4 sides because it's too big for people to really get into it.
I've uploaded way too many videos about this album to the channel, and every single time I do, there's a bunch of people in the comments talking about how this album is way too long, too many filler tracks. George Martin agreed that the album should have been shorter. And I really don't understand all of these complaints about the length of the album, because it is precisely because of how long it is, how versatile the boys were being, how much diversity is on the album when it comes to genres, that the album is as magical as it is, and in my opinion, one of the greatest albums of all time, if not the greatest. However, you guys know that I love conversation, I love disagreeing with people. That's pretty much the reason I started this channel. I wanted to create a community of opinionated music fans, so I thought it would be fun to make a little activity. Basically, what I'm going to try to do in this video, instead of reviewing the album or reviewing some of the comments that people make about it being too long, I'm going to try to cut some of the songs in the White Album, add a few more, and try and make it into a single disc album. Now, this is very complicated because, as a lot of you know, this album is not really known for having some of the best songs by the band. It's way more than the sum of its parts. You know, you do have some incredible songs, of course, but when you compare it to albums like Rubber Soul, Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour even, you don't really have the same quality in the track list. It's more like the collection of songs create a magical experience, not the songs by themselves. So deciding which tracks were not needed to maintain that magical energy was really complicated, but I tried my best and I'm really happy with the album I have in front of me. Now, I decided to add a few rules to make this video a little bit more interesting, okay? First of all, we're talking about a 12-inch vinyl album, which means that I have about 22 minutes per side. That means that the album can't be longer than 46 minutes. Then there's also the fact that I can't simply put 6 songs on one side and 6 songs on the other, because some songs are longer than others, which means that one side would have to be longer or wouldn't fit in the disc. Also, because this was such a hard video for me to make, I took a few liberties. Number 1, I don't have to follow the order of the album. I can rearrange the songs however I see fit, and I'm also allowing myself to include the 1968 non-album singles, for example, Hey Jude, Revolution, Lady Madonna, and Hey Bulldog. Those are within my options too. With that being said, I don't really want to make this intro too long, so let's just go and take a look at the improved single disc version of the White Album I built.
Yes, Larry.
It seemed to me from what I read that you had endorsed it and condemned it.
We were manufacturing it.
What's the story?
No, the business went bump.
Now, I have to be honest, the first few minutes of this video are not going to be that interesting, mainly because the opening track is staying the same. Back in the USSR is the perfect way to start the White Album. Let's bring it back to 1968. You're a Beatles fan, you heard a Revolver, Rubber Soul, Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, and now you want more. You want more psychedelia, you want the band to continue with this trend, but now they have released a new album and there's nothing but a white cover and the band's name. Expectations were all over the place, people didn't know what to expect from this album, and then the first song, the one that greets you into the world of the album, is a Chuck Berry parody called Back in the USSR. It sounds like a recipe for disaster. It doesn't sound like the best way to open up your album. However, Paul McCartney's energy, the catchy tune, and how much fun exhales from this song keeps you involved and makes you want to listen to more, see what this album has to offer. And that's exactly why I believe this is a great intro, because it lets you know you don't know what to expect from this album, okay? Don't think that you know what's going to happen next, because you don't. You don't have a clue of the type of genre, the type of performance style, or production that the boys are going to use, because the production, the vocals, the instrumentation, everything in this album is all over the place, and I think this is a really good way of telling people that without really saying anything. So Back in the USSR remains as the intro for the album. Another song that's going nowhere, and it's actually in the same place as in the original, is going to be Dear Prudence, mainly because Back in the USSR and Dear Prudence are connected through the instrumentation, okay? They kind of fade into each other, and that that adds a little sense of connection, even though both songs are completely different. Dear Prudence has this natural psychedelic energy to it, allowing people to sort of understand that even though the band is going in different directions, psychedelic music is still a really big part of their songwriting. And that's one of the things I love the most about the White Album. It's so organic in the way of how, the songs were conceived. A lot of people thought this album was like a statement from the band saying, we're done with the psychedelia, we're not going to do that anymore, we want to move on to something different. But in reality, it was the boys writing whatever they wanted to write, and sometimes it was psychedelic, sometimes it was just folky, sometimes it was a heavier version of rock, as we're going to see in just a couple of minutes. But they weren't really holding themselves back. They weren't really trying to go in a certain direction. They were basically writing whatever came to their mind, and the combination of sounds between Back in the USSR and Dear Prudence is a perfect example of that. It's a really good contrast, and that's why I wanted to keep both songs in their original placement. I think those two songs being at the very beginning of the album is some sort of statement saying we're writing whatever we want. We don't really care about the continuity, the cohesiveness, or even how the production is handled in this entire thing. And Dear Prudence, in my opinion, just so happens to be one of the best songs, if not the best, John Lennon wrote after Strawberry Fields Forever and A Day in the Life, so it definitely has to be in the album. Now, this is where things go a little bit different. This is where my organization and arrangement of the album changes a little bit, because instead of Glass Onion, we have Obla Di Obla Da. I personally find the happy, natural energy of Dear Prudence to blend really well into Obla Di Obla Da, which is a really hard song to place. It's very different from anything else in the album, actually. Very different from anything else in the band's discography, which shows the duality of Paul McCartney, the man's ability to create so many different moods, with a single voice and with a single songwriting pattern. Because if you look at the melody of this song and you look at the melody of songs like, some of his work with Wings, for example, it's very similar. The chords he uses, the tone of voice that he uses, all of it's very similar, but the man has this ability to create something new out of the same elements just by tweaking a few things, and Obla Di Obla Da is a perfect example, which is one of the reasons I wanted to keep it in the album. It's not my favorite at all, actually. Obla Di Obla Da is a moment of confusion in the White Album originally when I first heard it, because you're out of three of the best songs the Beatles ever wrote, Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, and Glass Onion, and now you jump into this weird carnival-like song that sounds like it should have been included in a B-sides album of Sgt. Pepper. It's not that I don't like the song, but it definitely lowers the quality of the album by a little bit. I know that this song has a lot of defendants out there, and people are going to flame me in the comments only for saying that, but this is my opinion. The purpose of Obla Di Obla Da, the way I see it, is adding color to the album, not really being the best song in the album. So even though it's not one of my favorites, I believe that it does have to be included. It's a really big part of the myth of the White Album, so... Now it's time for the fourth song, and I have to say it took me a while to decide if I wanted to include the song in the album. I love it, and I love Ringo, and I love his energy and how playful the guy is. I love his contributions when it comes to drumming to this album. I believe that he's really important, especially in songs like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, for example, or Long, 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 adding that sharpness that's needed to create the energy the track needs. However, when it comes to his vocal performance and sometimes his songwriting, his songs are not necessarily my favorite part of any Beatles album. The only album where I think he matched the energy of, the rest of the band would be Sgt. Pepper, with a little help of my friends, but Don't Pass Me By definitely doesn't feel like a highlight in the White Album. However, you do need at least one Ringo song per album. I think it would be a crime to change that. I'm trying to make this as, real as possible, trying to fit it into the concept of 1968 and how the band was at that moment. And given the fact that he left the band and then he came back and he had like a whole bouquet of flowers in his drum set, I think it's really cute to add the song only, for the sake of Ringo being in the album and maintaining that tradition. I don't know if you guys know this, but this song was supposed to be way longer. It had an intro, and I think you can find it in the 2018 mix of the album, in the remastered or remixed version. I don't know. There are so many different ones. And I wanted to use that version because it would have been way easier to fit it into the album with the intro, but it was way too long, and I wanted to stick to the 45, 46 minute rule. cool. So yeah. Now this is where it gets a little complicated because the fifth song is Helter Skelter. In the original album, you're way into the album by the time you listen to this song, which basically means that you're not really expecting the album to have any sort of logical progression, okay? You have tracks like Your Blues, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey, Revolution number 9. You're basically aware that the album is a mess and you're not supposed to expect any sort of continuity. However, in this case, I'm kind of role-playing here that this is an actual album that people would have listened to in 1968. So when you guys listen to this playlist, I want you guys to imagine that this is a proper album, and putting Helter Skelter in the middle of the album like that, it might be a little shocking, you know, it might be a little bit too much change, too much diversity. But, you know, the way I'm organizing this album, there's really nowhere else to put it. Helter Skelter is going to have to stay here, and that's the only placement I'm not happy with. This is one of the most trashy and dirty and just gruesome songs of 1968. A lot of people see Helter Skelter as the beginning of doom metal and death metal and all these different genres of music that use a heavier rock sound and use a production style that's not really as polished as many of the songs by Jimi Hendrix or The Who, you know, that were also heavy, also dirty, but not really as raw and organic as this song is. So I guess it does fit into the concept of the album I'm building here. Maybe I'm taking it too seriously, but when I was listening to this whole playlist, I didn't really think Helter Skelter fit properly into the album, but it has to be in it. This is one of the most, iconic songs the album has to offer, and one of the reasons why the White Album is seen as such an influential piece. You know, it's not only seen as a great album, but as a massive influence for heavier genres of music that came in the 70s and solidified themselves in the 80s. So it stays in the album, but the placement is a little odd. However, it does help a little bit when it comes to introducing track number 6, because we have the single version of Revolution. Not the acoustic Revolution number 1, we have the actual sharp, loud, and distorted version that was released as a non-album single alongside Hey Jude. Here's the thing, you guys have heard me say time and time again that the White Album is the greatest album of all time, and in my opinion, a perfect album. However, I do have a few complaints, and one of them is the fact that they decided to use Revolution number 1 instead of the more polished and overall more exciting version of the song, Revolution. So this was the perfect opportunity to correct that little mistake, because it should have been like that to begin with. Revolution is way more powerful and impactful than its slowed down version, so it's going to stay in this album as track number 6. Now it's time to wrap up side 1 of the album, and there's no better track to do so than George Harrison's masterpiece, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. In my opinion, one of the best, if not the best song he ever wrote. I loved Eric Clapton's guitar solo, I loved the drumming by Ringo Starr, very peculiar and weird and unique, one of the reasons why I think he was vital for this album. I enjoyed George Harrison's performance a lot. I like Paul McCartney's backing vocals. I believe that the whole band did a really good job with the song, and I personally feel like the opening piano and how diverse the instrumentation, you know, the instrumental palette in the song is compared to some of the other songs in the album make it stand out. This is definitely one of the moments in the album where you realize you're listening to a masterpiece, and for that reason, it has to stay in the album, and I believe it's a really good closer for side 1. Now it's time to go for side 2 of the album, and I know a lot of you probably noticed that side 1 is looking very similar to the original, but that's about to change. Deciding which song was going to be the intro for side 2 was a little complicated because there's a lot of good candidates, but ultimately I believe that Happiness is a Warm Gun was the best option. This song is one of the most impressive ones out of the whole album, mainly because it was a medley before medleys were a thing. I know a lot of people like to look at The Who and songs like I Can See for Miles and saying that they were the first ones to do it, but honestly I find Happiness is a Warm Gun to be closer to what an actual medley is, and for that reason I thought it was a really good way to open up the second half by being more than one song packed into a single track. Throughout the entirety of the song, John changes the mood of the album by changing his performance style, the instrumental palette, the tempo, and I think that creates a really good opener for a hypothetical second half of this album. And it only gets better because track number 9 in this album is no other than Glass Onion. This song has to be one of the most interesting ones John Lennon ever wrote, so not only because of his amazing vocal performance and how the song escalates by adding a bunch of elements to the instrumental instrumentation like strings and echo drums, but also because of all the little nods the song has to previous John Lennon songs like I Am the Walrus and Strawberry Fields Forever. I personally find it to be one of my favorite moments inside one of the album in the original album, so I definitely wanted to add it into this one too. However, I didn't really think it fit the energy of the side 1 I built, so I decided to put it on side 2. It sounds a little out of place, it sounds like it's one of those statement tracks where the Beatles were showing that this album was going to be completely different from anything else, but given that Happiness is a Warm Gun is such a multifaceted song, I think it kind of made sense for Glass Onion to also be there, because the song starts pretty simple, there's nothing too special about it, but then as more elements are added to the instrumentation, it becomes more aggressive and more chaotic, and ultimately you get that climax towards the end. That's one of my favorite moments in the album, and there's a bird just singing out there, I'm sorry. However, something the White Album is known for is pairing up a bunch of loud, distorted, and ugly moments with some of the most beautiful, tender, and simple pieces of music the band ever made, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this album too, because track number 10 is going to be I Will by Paul McCartney. I know that there's a lot of songs to choose from, and I know that a lot of you are probably going to flame me for picking this song over more maybe relevant tracks like Piggies, with its political commentary, or Sexy Sadie based on, the controversy behind it. However, I genuinely feel like I Will and many other moments by Paul McCartney in this album, like Mother Nature's Son, Honey Pie, Martha My Dear, Rocky Raccoon, are crucial for the identity of the White Album and for the album to be as legendary as it is, because I feel like sometimes artists make albums with so much distortion and so much energy and euphoria, and they forget to add a moment of relaxation, a shelter from the storm. It's just pure energy, pure chaos throughout the whole listen, and I think that metal bands and, dark wave bands that are able to create this moments of peace and maybe even, beauty inside of an album that's not supposed to be beautiful, know how to handle their aggressiveness properly, because you don't really, if you just listen to loud noises the whole time, the loud noises start not being as loud, they start to lose power because you've been listening to them for a long time. Instead, if you add a moment of calm, if you add a moment of peace, and then you go back to being chaotic, and then you go back to being unpredictable, that's when it hits you the most. And I think the bands like Metallica, for example, the Swans, Black Sabbath knew exactly what they were doing in songs like Changes, for example, in Volume 4, or maybe To Be Kind, or the opening part of Screenshot, or Just a Little Boy. All of these songs that are not as fast, are not as aggressive and as loud as some others. They're simply giving you the ability to breathe before you can jump back in the water. Because of this, I wanted to keep I Will in the album, and I'm also going to keep the next song, Blackbird. Now, this song is way easier to justify because you're not only talking about a beautiful song, you also have some very deep political commentary in it. I don't think I need to explain to you what the song is about. I think that only by the title you can already have a pretty good idea of what the song's referencing. It was released in 1968 at the pinnacle of the civil rights movement, so yeah, I think, in my opinion, one of the greatest songs Paul McCartney ever made, at least when it comes to, the folky side of Paul McCartney. This is definitely one of the best ones, and it definitely needs to stay in the album because it was a really big moment for the Beatles, a moment of maturity. Even though in albums like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, they were already complaining about certain political issues, like in songs like Taxman, for example, and All You Need Is Love in the Magical Mystery Tour album. I feel like this was one of the first times they started to go into more taboo themes, and I think that's really important, especially because songs like Revolution and Piggies and Blackbird seem to be more relevant now than ever, with the current state of things right now. So yeah, definitely has to stay in the album. Before I even started to arrange the songs in this album, I knew that the following song was going to be included because, in my opinion, is the climax of the album, the best moment. The first time I heard this song, I literally had a religious experience, something that I cannot explain with words. Long, 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 in my opinion, is the best song that George Harrison ever wrote, and I cannot stress this enough. Like, this is one of the most magical, mysterious, and out of this world experiences I've ever had with music. So even though it doesn't really fit that well into this hypothetical album, it has to be included in it because the feeling you get when you've heard so many different styles and you've been through so many different genres and instrumental palettes and performance styles, there's something so peaceful and so tender in a way about this song that makes you feel like, even though you're not really talking to George Harrison, even though the guy's not even alive anymore, he understands your issues, and through this song he's trying to help you with them. It sounds weird, it sounds silly, but it's music, it's wonderful, and that's literally how it makes me feel. Sometimes I'm having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, month, and then I listened to the song, and I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like the song understands my struggles and is trying to help me with them by giving me a moment to breathe, a moment to relax, and I really appreciate it. It's one of the most wonderful experiences I've had with music, so even if I don't know where to fit this song, I don't know how to make it, make sense inside of this hypothetical album I built, I have to include it. Believe me, this is something that engulfs you and doesn't let go of you, and it's one of the main reasons why I keep coming back to the album, even though I've been listening to it nonstop for 10 years. The way it is right now, we have 12 songs and 39 minutes in length, which means I can add one more song to the album, and I know, you know, we all know which song that's gonna be. One of the craziest things about the White Album is that there's so many people that think the album should have been shorter, when in reality, the album would have been 1,000 times better had it been longer, with songs like Junk, All Things Must Pass, Lady Madonna, Hey Bulldog, Revolution, and ultimately Hey Jude. Hey Jude was a song that was born to be in the White Album, and why they decided to not include it is beyond me. I know that they have like a rule that said that if you released a single before the album, you couldn't include it in the album, but that's silly. This is one of the greatest songs of all time, and instead of Hey Jude, we have Good Night, which is not necessarily a bad way to close the album, but it would have been so much better if towards the end we had the chants by the people, the na-na-nas, and Paul McCartney's incredible performance, the way he screams his lungs out by the end of the song, the climax, such an amazing way to close what in my opinion would have been the greatest album of all time had it been released, with Hey Jude towards the end. The album is already my favorite album of all time, but there's a few that come really close, but instead if you had Hey Jude instead of Good Night or after Good Night, it would have been 1,000 times better, and that's why I'm closing my album, my hypothetical single disc White Album, with Hey Jude at the very end, because it's simply such a wonderful way to close any album. You can put this song in any Beatles album and it's gonna work, because you can't hate on Hey Jude. You can't say the song is overrated, you can't say the song is overplayed. No one says that, because everyone loves every second of the song for a reason. It is one of the greatest songs of all time, and it's the way I decided to close my hypothetical album. That means the album has 13 songs in it, and it's 46 minutes in length, which follows all the rules, and I'm really happy with the track list I put together. I heard the album a couple times as if it was an actual album, and I really enjoyed my time with it. However, I have to say, this is not better than the original one. I feel like you are missing way too many songs. You're missing the organic element the album brings to the table with songs like Why Don't We Do It on the Road. You are missing out on songs like Julia, for example, by John Lennon, a pivotal moment for him as a songwriter. You're missing out on George Harrison's brass experiment and Savoy Truffle and his political commentary on piggies. When it comes to Paul McCartney, you're missing one of the most beautiful songs he ever wrote in Mother Nature's Son, his incredible storytelling in Rocky Raccoon, and obviously Ringo has another song in this album, a beautiful rendition of Good Night, and that orchestral moment by George Martin is also a really good moment in the album. You're missing out on a lot of moments that make the White Album as iconic as it is. The White Album is what it is because of how it is, and even though you may feel like a certain song is filler, when you take it out of the album and you listen to it, it feels like something's missing. Every piece is needed, and for that reason, I totally agree with Paul McCartney when he said,
I'm not a great one for that. Maybe it was too many of that. Look, what do you mean? It was great. It sold. It's the bloody Beatles White Album. Shut up.
However, as I always say, this is only my own personal opinion. I want to know your opinion on my version of the White Album, and I want you to leave your own version of the album down below in the comments. Everyone can check it out, including myself, and I can give you my opinion on your opinion. That is pretty much going to be it for today's video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, an album, or an artist, leave it down below as well, and I'll make sure to read it and fulfill your request as soon as I can. With that being said, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.